City of Stevens Point Finance Committee meeting, recorded October 23, 2023.
All right, I will call the meeting of our Finance Committee to order. It's 6 p.m. Carrie, if you could take the roll, please.
Christensen?
I'm here.
Sure.
Me too.
I don't have my list.
And then Elder Broderick,
Okay.
She's no.
And
she's here.
Signless.
It looks
Where are we
like
missing?
Alder Shuda is joining us online.
mine.
Yep, he's a
Okay.
committee member.
Yep, I'm right here.
And Morrow, is he excused?
They're gone, I think. Yep, so it looks like Alderman Morrow's absent, the other four are here. So we do have a
Okay.
quorum. We have a very short, succinct agenda tonight, but important work to do. We'll be reviewing our proposed 2024 operating budget that'll be presented to us this evening by our Comptroller Treasurer, Corey Laddick. Mr. Laddick, take it over.
All right, well, thank you. So first of all, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask that during the presentation. That way you're not hanging on to the presentation or hanging on to the question until the end, and you can get your question answered right away. So feel free to ask as many questions as you like or interject any input that you would like to in the presentation. So here we are again, 2024 operating budget presentation. So if I can get the next slide. First of all, I wanted to kind of review where we are in the process. This actually is not the start of our operating budget process. That happened in July and August when we had initial budget discussions, and the Finance Committee and the Common Council set guidelines for the 2024 operating budget. And then also September and October, we went through the capital budget that's now been approved. Right now, where we're at is we're in the initial budget presentation. So this is just an initial presentation, chance to ask any initial questions or express any initial concerns. There's no formal action today. And then at November Finance, the Finance Committee can take action on the budget, can recommend a budget to the full council with or without changes. That's up to the Finance Committee. And then November Council is the final approval from the full council. And then also mid to late December is when the tax bills arrive, which I know is everybody's favorite part. So moving on to the next slide. So decisions that have already been made, these were made during August Finance Council. The first one was to prioritize employee compensation as the use for any budgetary flexibility. And this included the pay plan implementation as well as trying to do a decent number for a cost of living adjustment. We also decided to roll over the property tax levy limit adjustment for operations to the 2025 budget. We did that because we do have the shared revenue to get us through the 2024 budget, and we will need that extra adjustment in 2025 due to a projected low net new construction number for 2025. And basically that net new construction number, that's how much our property tax base has grown due to new construction, new taxable buildings going up. And that determines how much we can increase property taxes for operations. So when we have a budget year when that number is only 1 or 1.5%, that's a pretty difficult budget year to get through. So basically the thought process was our number for the 2024 budget was pretty low. We're expecting a low number for 2025. So rolling that over, we're going to put those two numbers together to make one decent number, and that can get us through the 2025 budget. We also decided, based on the revaluation and the impacts that we expect from the redistribution of the property tax burden, to avoid increasing the total amount that we collect in taxes for the 2024 budget. So the amount of taxes that we collect for 2024, if this budget is approved as proposed, would be the same as it was last year. However, there still can be some pretty significant impacts from the revaluation. So just because we're doing that doesn't mean that no one's tax bills will change. Tax bills very likely will change just based on that change citywide in assessments. So a couple of highlights. First of all, we budgeted for continuity of services, and this is always a challenge with every budget, and that's kind of the first thing that we try to do is continue funding for existing programs and positions, and oftentimes that can eat up a lot of our budgetary flexibility. Also, we had obviously some cost increases. Some were not discretionary, such as pension contribution rate increases again. They increased last year, they're increasing again for next year. Also, police and fire wage increases. And then we have the wage increases outside of police and fire, which are discretionary, and also IT cost increases. So we did have some fairly significant cost increases to contend with. Luckily, our revenues increased as well, especially with state aid programs and the new shared revenue bill, which we'll get into quite a bit. And then also doing pretty well on investment interest revenue with our current interest rate environment. So, a note about making numbers understandable. Usually I always gave to the dollar number. Did an online training where they talked about how to make numbers understandable, and one of the recommendations was to round with enthusiasm. That rounded numbers are better, and that finance people need to stop being so precise when they present numbers, because it's just giving people a little bit too much information that they don't really need. So I tried to incorporate that, take that to heart, so most of the numbers are rounded to the nearest thousand. So just wanted to make everyone aware of that. Next, we'll move on to the budget summary page. This is in the front of the budget book, and it's a good summary of sort of how the budget has changed. One thing that I wanted to note is capital. It looks like that's a decrease. This budget summary page really refers to the general fund budget, and for the city we have a number of different funds. We also have a capital projects fund, as well as a debt service fund and a bunch of other funds. So it looks like the capital improvements went down. That's because the general fund portion that's funding capital improvements did go down. However, our total capital budget is increasing for 2024, so I just wanted to point that out, that that's not a decrease in the amount of capital investment that we have. And then also you'll notice that the levy amounts are zero. Like I said, we're keeping those the same, so that's pretty unusual, so I wanted to note that as well. Of course, next year we will be looking at increasing the total levy just based on where we're at with operations and capital and the needs that we have. So next slide. I kind of already covered this as far as the budget summary page details, so we can go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, so I always like to go through the sources and uses of available funds. So I'd like to start with the sources. So first of all, we had an $865,000 increase in shared revenue, $260,000 increase in investment interest revenue. Our net new construction, now of course we are rolling this over, so we're not using this, but I still put it on here just because I didn't want to lose track of what it is and how much we're rolling over. That's $169,000, and that's based on net new construction of 1.33%. So basically that means that our tax base due to grew 1.33% due to new construction, and that's the amount that then results from that. We had a $99,000 increase in general transportation aid, which is definitely good to see. It saved $91,000 by moving wellness expenses back to the health insurance fund. $60,000 increase in room tax revenue, $22,000 increase in the expenditure restraint program aid, and a $21,000 increase in connecting highway aid. And I do have slides on all of these individually. So first of all, get into shared revenue. I put together quite a few slides on shared revenue because it's the thing that we've probably been hearing most about in terms of local government news, and also some very significant changes related to shared revenue. So I thought it was good to take a deep dive on the issue. So basically, the shared revenue is a program. It was established in 1911, so it predates all of us. And it goes back to when the state started an income tax. And the point of that income tax was to reduce property taxes. So I think it's kind of interesting that all the way back in 1911, people were complaining about property taxes and trying to figure out what we can do to reduce property taxes. So they created the income tax. 70% of that income tax went to the municipality of the taxpayer, 20% went to the county, and 10% is all that the state kept. Obviously, that's changed pretty significantly since then. We don't get anywhere near 70% of the income tax. The state's deviated quite a bit from what that original formula was. And one of the issues with the original formula as well was because it was return to source, in other words, whatever community you collected it in was who got it back. You had sort of the issue of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. If you're a wealthy community, you got a lot back. If you were a poorer community, you didn't get as much back. So then, going on to the next slide, in 1972, changed to a need-based formula based on population equalized value per capita. So basically, that's the property value per capita. And the lower your property values are, the more money you would get. And then also your revenue requirements. So basically, the more money you spent, the more money that you got back. And that formula probably made a lot of sense to really base it on what the needs of different communities were. However, in 2001, that was the last year that the formula was actually used. And then basically they froze it and said, okay, now it's simply going to be based on the previous year's payment. So that has not been adjusted for over 20 years. Then in 2011, of course, we had Act 10, changes to public employee benefits and to offset some of the savings that the local governments were expected to realize from changing employee benefits, decreased shared revenue. And so we have been getting less shared revenue than we did before 2011. And then since 2011, that amount of aid has essentially been frozen. And what's happened is that buying power has eroded over time just with inflation, with changes in the time value of money. So this graph, this is from the Wisconsin Policy Forum Dollars and Cents Report, and it's statewide numbers. And basically what you can see is the purplish line is the proportion of general revenue for local governments that comes from property taxes, and the green line that you see going down is the proportion that's state aid. So you can see really since 2001 you see a definite trend there where those lines have diverged quite a bit. There's been increasing burden on the property taxpayer and less money that the state has provided. So how does that look for the city of Stevens Point? I put together a few pie charts going back to 2001, 2011, and 2023, and the dark blue portion is property taxes, the green portion is the shared revenue program, and you can see from 2001 to 2011 to 2023 that proportion of shared revenue has continued to shrink from 23% to 16% to 13%, and then the property taxes, that portion has consistently increased over that same period to make up for that. So then the next slide, I wanted to see what that would look like with the new increase in shared revenue and also with us freezing property taxes for 2024. And one of the things that you can see is that green box, or the green piece of the pie chart, that's the shared revenue portion, did increase. It went from 13% back to 16%, and you can see it shoved over that property tax portion a little bit from 50% to 47%. So that was definitely good to see that's finally getting straightened out a little bit. However, we're still not back to the 2001 numbers in terms of the proportion of our budget funded by shared revenue and funded by property taxes. So getting into the increase, I mentioned there's an increase. This year we had the Shared Revenue Bill, Act 12, designates 20% of state sales tax collections for county and municipal aid. So basically, the state sales tax is 5%. So people like to say, okay, it's 1 penny per dollar spent that's going to county and municipal aid. And also, it's not a return to source program, so it does not matter in which municipality it's collected. Doesn't matter if it's Stevens Point or Wausau or La Crosse or Green Bay. It goes into one statewide pool of money for local government aid. The nice thing, and one of the key pieces of this act, is that future aid increases or decreases are based on changes in state sales tax revenue. So if the sales tax goes up by 3% going forward, then our shared revenue goes up by 3%. Now, the downside of that is if state sales tax collections go down by 2%, well, then our shared revenue also goes down by 2%. So it can be a bit of a double-edged sword, but over the long term, over 5, 10, 20-year periods, we're very confident that the overall trend will be upward, even if you have some bumps along the way related to the economy and that sort of thing. So $275 million increase in county and municipal aid. Like I said, our share of that is $865,000, which sounds like a lot of money. As I've reminded you before, it's 3.2% of our annual operating budget. And also, it did come with some strings attached, the additional funds may be utilized for law enforcement, fire protection, emergency medical services, emergency response communication, public works, courts, and transportation. The above functions were 74% of our 2023 operating budget, so I didn't have a lot of concerns about meeting this requirement, just because actually you look at that list of things, that's the bulk of what the city does. So we do have sufficient cost increases to justify it. Here's the list of the cost increases in eligible categories, so you can see the total is over $1 million. So we're well justified that, yes, we're spending the whole $865,000 in eligible categories per the requirements. So what did that shared revenue increase mean for the city of Stevens Point? So kind of going back, we've been talking about the 2024 budget for a while. We started 2023 projecting a budget issue for 2024 due to low new construction. And we didn't know what was going to happen with shared revenue at that point, but as many of you may remember, we talked about options. We talked about going to referendum. We talked about increasing fees, such as a wheel tax or a transportation utility. And ultimately, we decided not to go to referendum or pursue those other things when we heard about the bipartisan talk of increasing shared revenue. So we took a little bit of a leap of faith and said, both parties are talking about this. We think we can hold off on the new revenue options and see what the state does. So, and then as the shared revenue deal came together, of course, we realized, as I mentioned before, that 2025 was going to be a difficult year as well due to low net new construction. So decided to roll over that tax levy limit adjustment to 2025. So basically, to sum it up, the shared revenue increase is getting us through 2 bad budget years, which actually is huge. That's hugely helpful. Allowed us to forego a tax increase for 2024 and allowed us to make significant progress on employee compensation. Now, and I don't want this to sound negative or ungrateful, because we are very grateful for the increases that we've had in shared revenue, but just some of the things what the shared revenue increase didn't do for the city of Stevens Point. Unfortunately, it didn't quite solve all of our problems. It didn't address the adequacy of staffing levels. We still have phases 2 and 3 of our personnel plan that are still waiting to be implemented. It didn't address our infrastructure capital project deficit, and that's something that needs to continue to be on the radar screen for future budgets as we try to address that issue. We still have an unsustainable levy limit formula, and that's especially becoming a concern as our commercial construction. We've had some light years for commercial construction. That's, been hitting the budget, so hopefully we can turn that trend around, but if not, that certainly could be a problem for the future. And so there's no guarantee that we won't have future budget issues, and overall, the initial shared revenue proposal was actually for $2,185,000, and that would have allowed us to address more of those issues. That would have allowed us to address those staffing issues and some other things. Unfortunately, we ended up with less than half of that amount at the $865,000. So again, don't want to sound negative, but just being realistic about what it did for us, what it didn't do for us, and certainly, although this is very helpful, if you know any state legislators, we still could use more money in shared revenue for sure as time goes on. Wanted to share a Wisconsin Public Radio article that was online that I thought the headline really hit the nail on the head, that the state's shared revenue deal was more lifeline than bonanza for smaller municipalities. Needs go beyond what supplemental aid can cover. I couldn't have said it better myself. And one of the quotes from here is Eau Claire talking about how really they're just covering the costs of inflation with the shared revenue increase. They're not adding new programs or adding new services or expanding existing ones. So, going a little bit deeper into how the shared revenue increases were calculated, every municipality was divided into a tier based on their population. We fell into the tier of 5 to 30,000 in population. The components of the formula, there was a minimum 20% increase in shared revenue, plus a per capita portion of the distribution. And the problem with how this was implemented, in my opinion, and we weren't the biggest winner, we weren't the biggest loser as a result of this, but using the existing shared revenue amounts as the base really built on some existing inequities in how shared revenue is distributed. And you'll see that on this next graph here. You can see a variety of different municipalities, and you can see that their existing amounts of shared revenue are the dark blue lines, and then their supplemental amounts are the green bars. And you can see that if you're a city like Beloit, you really did well because you already get a lot of shared revenue, so minimum 20% increase, that's really a lot for you. Now, if you're Janesville or Eau Claire, you don't get a lot of shared revenue per capita, so that 20% increase wasn't nearly as much. As far as where Stevens Point falls, I put these all in order. So Stevens Point, we do a little bit better than Wausau in terms of shared revenue per capita, and we also did better on how much we got per capita. But Wisconsin Rapids and Marshfield both get significantly more than us. Actually, they're smaller municipalities, and on an absolute basis, they get more shared revenue than us, and they got more of an increase than we did. So they did quite a bit better. Just wanted to show this, that the results were really all over the map, and that you might hear different things from different municipalities about what they're doing with the shared revenue money, and different municipalities got different amounts, so it'll go farther in some municipalities than it will in others. Also, the shared revenue bill set aside $300 million in one-time grants for service consolidation. So that's known as the Innovation Fund. So actually, more money went to the Innovation Fund than went to the shared revenue increase, which I personally all for innovation, but we really could have used more of that money on the shared revenue increase. But that being said, the requirements for it are, it requires service consolidation either with another unit of local government or a nonprofit or private entity, and you must save at least 10% to qualify. And if you're able to do this, if you're able to combine services or contract out services, then you get a cash grant, basically a bonus, equal to 25% of the cost of the service for 3 years. So I do think that it is somewhat limiting because there are a lot of ways that we could innovate without consolidating services, but unfortunately, those are the requirements of the program, but we are exploring it internally to see what opportunities might be out there to try to think outside the box a little bit. Also, new with the shared revenue bill, we have maintenance of effort requirements for police. So they need to certify just one of these three factors, which would be that the number of sworn officers employed has not decreased from the prior year, the amount of property tax levy dollars spent on employment of sworn officers has not decreased, or the percentage of property tax levy spent on employment of sworn officers has not decreased. We're still waiting for some guidance on how some of this is calculated, because we don't typically tie out how much levy goes to each individual department. Usually we're really just looking at the general fund revenue, which is a mix of sources. But something to be aware of, certainly, that we have less flexibility in making adjustments to police and fire. And then also maintenance of effort requirements for fire and EMS. With this one, need to certify that at least 2 of the 4 have not decreased. Expenditures for fire protective services and EMS. And this is actual expenditures, not budgeted expenditures, which is kind of a pain because sometimes departments do fluctuate in their expenses from year to year. And we have a number of full-time equivalent firefighters and EMS personnel employed, level of training and maintenance of licensure for firefighters and EMS personnel, and response times for fire and EMS adjusted for call location. So I did ask both of the chiefs if they had any big concerns about meeting these requirements, and they said, as long as our budgets are stable and we continue to fund them how we have been, that they don't have any concerns right now in terms of meeting the maintenance of effort requirements, which is a good thing, because when we go to the next slide, you can see that the penalty is 15% of our total shared revenue, which is $639,000. So I'd say we literally cannot afford to fail to meet these requirements. $639,000 is obviously a lot of money, so very important that we pay attention to those requirements and make sure that we're in compliance. Other Act 12 provisions, we have a repeal of the personal property tax, which is a tax on business property that's not real estate. It can be desks, chairs, furniture, that type of thing. It's not effective until January 1st, 2024, though, so everyone will receive at least one final personal property tax bill. And then what's going to happen then is that the state is going to give us an aid payment to make up for that lost revenue that we would otherwise be collecting from the personal property tax. Also made some changes for TIF districts. So TIF districts created in 2025 and beyond modifies that net new construction adjustment, makes it less favorable for municipalities to develop in TIF districts. So that wasn't a positive change, but it was included in the bill. And then moving on, we have advisory referenda. So no more advisory referenda related to legalizing marijuana and that type of thing. We can now only do it for 4 reasons, which is a capital project, local revenue sharing agreements, boundary agreements, or establishment of a municipal cable, broadband, or telecommunications utilities. So that is more restrictive in terms of what we're allowed to do an advisory referendum for, and then also no local discrimination or preferences based on race, color, ancestry, national origin, or sexual orientation, unless required for federal grants. Okay, so that was a lot about shared revenue. I don't know if anyone has any initial questions about shared revenue. I know that was a lot of information. No? Okay, sounds good. So we'll keep moving on. So then our next big increase in revenue was investment interest revenue, increased by $260,000. Interest rates have increased, and the backbone of our investment structure is a 5-year certificate of deposit ladder with maturity spread out evenly over 5 years. That's really important because as interest rates change, we don't want to take a huge hit to the budget. One of the things that we were able to do is we were able to actually take some early withdrawal penalties to essentially rebuild that deposit ladder at higher rates, so which will be much more profitable over the long term. So it really allowed us to get the best of both worlds. When we've had interest rates go down, we've hung on to our certificates at the higher rates, and that's helped us, get through that as far as not taking a big budgetary impact. And now that interest rates have gone up, we were able to retool a few things and move some things around to take advantage of those higher rates. So certainly that was helpful in balancing the budget this year and doing some of the things that we did. Next slide, that just shows the graph of how the interest revenue has trended from 2011 to 2022. As you can see, 2019 we got pretty close to $800,000. So certainly for 2023 and 2024, I expect we'll be right there, which is great. That's definitely good to see that revenue increasing. Also talking a little bit about net new construction. I know I already talked about this a little bit, but basically the number this year was 1.33%, which as you can see from the graph is lower than some of our previous years. So certainly it's harder to get through a budget with 1.33%, 2.5%, 2.8%, that's a lot nicer. 3.99, that was the year that the Century Building went up on the north side of town. That was definitely a good budget year. But it is what it is. It goes up and down just based on the growth in construction. So, and then I always like to show sort of what the big projects were. So we had a little bit over $35 million in new construction. The big projects were North Side Yard, $9.7 million. Also the Banter Apartments on the Point Motel site, $5.2 million. So those are both projects that the council has worked pretty hard on in terms of negotiating development agreements, so nice to see how that affects our net new construction and the returns that we get from that. And then moving on to the next, this is just a pie chart, again, shows the different projects and how they influenced our net new construction number. As you can see, we really rely on those bigger projects to really make it work for net new construction. This one I did projects over $1 million, and you can see that's the majority of them. You have other projects that are a smaller share, but those big projects are really what tend to make or break your net new construction number. Then moving on, general transportation aid. It's a reimbursement for past transportation spending, and it's gone up for two reasons. One is the state did add a little bit of money to the program, but also our average spending on roads has increased. So as that's increased, we get more money back because it is a percentage reimbursement for our spending on transportation. Then also wellness expenses, we're moving those back to the health insurance fund. For the 2021 budget, we moved them to the general fund in order to help out the health insurance fund. We have a self-insured health insurance fund, and our health insurance fund has been performing well so far in 2023, knock on wood. So we're proposing to move those wellness expenses back to the health insurance fund, and then that did help balance the budget in terms of saving the general fund some money. And then increased room tax revenue, so that's an 8% tax on paid hotel stays. 30% goes to the general fund, and then it's also split up with the Convention and Visitors Bureau and the Tourism Commission. We have a $60,000 increase in our portion. That's just the general fund portion. Benefits those other entities listed as well. And you can see the graph. You can see that our room tax has fully recovered and actually exceeded how much money we were collecting in room tax before the pandemic. So certainly that's good to see that we have a very strong visitors program here. And expenditure restraint program aid, that's a state aid program for limiting the total size of our operating budget. That increased by $22,000 in terms of that aid payment. We have connecting highway aid. That's a $21,000 increase. Nice to finally see this one going up. This is an aid program for maintaining state highways that go through the city, which for us is Highway 66. Funding stagnated for years while the costs of construction and maintaining roads have gone up. State finally recognized this and increased funding for the program by 25%. So that's definitely a good thing. It's kind of about time with that one. So, but nice to see that increase. Okay, now we'll go on to uses of available funds. The biggest one was wage increases for $774,000. And then we also have increased IT expenses for $105,000, $64,000 in increased pension contribution rates, $63,000 in increased election expenses, and we'll get a little bit more into that. We're actually creating a separate fund now for elections. $60,000 for the union wage adjustment for the fire department, and also, as you remember, last year we did make some cuts to various department line items in order to get a higher cost of living adjustment for the employees, and that was $22,500, and we are restoring that for 2024. So we're basically giving back what we had to take away last year, which is a good thing. So pay plan adjustment history. You can see sort of how that's trended. Usually it's been from 1.5% to 3% every year. This year we are proposing 6.26%, which is very good, and really the only reason why that's possible is due to the shared revenue increase. So I do want to note that it's unlikely that we're going to be able to do 6% cost of living adjustments in the future. Also, I listed sort of the minimum wages that we have for full-time employees. So the minimum wage that we would start any full-time employee would be $23.69 an hour. So certainly, you know, hopefully we try to have good family supporting wages. Then increased IT expenses, basically because there was a need for IT contracted services to increase to address the citywide level of need for IT support. And then we also moved some software license fees from the Community Media Fund to the General Fund IT budget. And then we have Wisconsin Retirement System employer contribution rates. Those increased. The percentages there, as you can see, mainly it was the police and fire rates that went up, so that had an impact of $64,000. And then getting to the new election fund. So basically, this is a new way to budget for elections. In the past, we always had this fluctuation between even numbered years where we have 4 elections and we have presidential or gubernatorial elections and they're really expensive and they cost a lot of money. And then odd numbered years where you just have your local spring elections and it's not that expensive. So you always had this where that amount was either going up or going down. And basically the solution worked with Clark Yunter, and we came up with a better solution, which was to create a separate fund for elections. If you want to look at it, it's page 61 of the budget book. And we'll transfer the same amount of money into it every year. So that there's level funding so that we don't have this up and down all the time in terms of a budget impact. And then that fund, of course, will save some money in odd numbered years and build up a balance, and then in even number years it'll get drawn back down, so it'll act like a shock absorber so that you don't have that impact on the budget. One of the things that we will need to do is we will need to do an additional transfer from fund balance this year of about $105,000 to get that fund started and prepared for the presidential election. So that'll be coming probably November finance, just because, of course, just creating this fund, we don't have, that balance of money to be able to fund a presidential election. So then getting into the proposed levy, how much, is this going to cost us in property taxes? Like I said, we're not changing the total levy, so the total amount that we collect in property taxes will stay the same from last year. And with the revaluation, quite a big increase in the assessed value, so that does lower the tax rate. Right now I'm projecting $8.11. However, sometimes that does vary by a few cents, and just so you know, it's the total levy that we adopt with the budget, not the tax rate. And then this graph just shows how our assessed tax rate has changed over time. So you can see projected to drop from $11.30 to $8.11. And then the equalized tax rate just shows, basically if it was fair market value, what that tax rate would be based on your fair market value. You can see that that has sort of declined over time, which basically just shows that, the amount that we collect in taxes has not grown as fast as property values have grown, which is probably a good thing because I know property values have grown by quite a bit. So with that, take any questions or any discussion from anybody. I know it was a lot of information all at once, and I don't know if, did you want to start with the committee?
Sure.
or-
Committee members, any questions, thoughts? be
Thanks,
sure.
Chair. Thank you for all of that, and especially for putting in context the dynamic with the state, which I want to linger on for a moment before asking a question. So basically, state tax cuts have been on the backs of local government because of this steep decline in revenue sharing, and you showed that graph where property taxes have gone up as revenue sharing has gone down because things have to be paid for. But what's extra insulting in the presentation is, but even with our, bearing most of that tax burden, we still have to prove ourselves worthy by meeting these maintenance of effort requirements. And then, with regard to this innovation fund, instead of assuming, which they could, that local governments are pinching our pennies, which we have to because of the lack of revenue sharing, instead the legislature puts all this money into, mind you, it's a one-time innovation grants, right?
Yes.
Okay. The premise of which is all these imagined efficiencies, like just waiting to be realized through reorganization. Oh, and through privatization, because profit-making enterprises are always more cost-efficient. All right, end of sermon. If I remember right, we've talked before about departments are good at pinching pennies. That's been shown. But we end up with, because of contingency and because planned budgets, we budget so conservatively that we end up with gaps in what's spent and what's budgeted. And were we making an effort to close that gap a bit? Am I remembering that right? That's what I thought I remembered.
So, what I would say is, over time, you've had, basically, but the departments have been stuck with sort of zero-based budgets where we've allowed a 0% increase in their line items. So definitely,
That's
I
tight,
think,
yes.
you are seeing that over time, that as, you sort of pinch that, maybe, in the past, maybe you had some money left over in your line items, but as we've sort of held them to that and we've said, look, if you want to increase one line item, you have to offset it by decreasing another. Yeah, I do believe that over time we are getting to more of a point where, departments aren't going to be able to return as much to us just because they've been held to no increases. So, but every budget, budgets kind of fluctuate. Every budget is different. So sometimes you have vacancies or something that might save you some money. So it's hard to say that, what exactly the future holds in terms of how much we get back. But
You'd be the person to ask, because what's behind my question is just for planning purposes. if planned budget was closer to actual expenditures, that would just help. I would assume that would just help with the books.
Well, I'm always happy when people return
Right.
money, but I will say with the maintenance of effort requirements, especially the one with fire with, expenditures, actually, I provided feedback to the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, and they tried to make this change to get it based on budgeted expenditures rather than actual expenditures, because you never know where actual expenditures are going to go up, or are going to,
A few months
they can-
of a position being open would, right.
Yeah, so it would have been much easier to comply with a provision like that if we had it based on the actual budget, because then we can review a budget for compliance and say, yeah, it's more than last year, so we're meeting this. Whereas you base it on actual, experience, and you base it on actual employees, not budgeted employees, that definitely creates some difficulties, because, yeah, you might have a position that's vacant, maybe you don't fill it right away, and now you haven't met that specific maintenance of effort requirements. The saving grace, I guess, is that, we only have to meet one or two of the requirements depending on if it's police or fire, so that helps. But, yeah, it still makes me nervous, especially the amount of penalty that's out there. I would agree with you that, certainly the state has not made it easy for us to invest in, public safety and in the police and fire departments with levy limits and everything else. And what would have been really nice, what I think would have really paired well with the maintenance of effort requirements, would have been a levy limit exception for public safety, for police and fire. I think that would have made a lot of sense, but the legislature didn't want to go there, so.
Alder Shore, I would agree with your take of the fallacy of tax cuts at the state level. They were basically tax shifts because of those services still needed to be provided. We didn't receive the shared revenues, so all the other taxing entities, the counties, the municipalities, and the school districts had to increase their levy in order to still provide those necessary services. So the state legislature looked great because they had these tax cuts, but it wasn't actually a cut, it was just a shift to the other entities, so.
It's the same reason tuition goes up in state university systems,
Yep,
because the budget goes down.
agreed. Alder Broderick, any thoughts?
Firstly, just, I guess, a comment. It seemed to me that the ban on advisory referenda was sort of a buried lead in there. I'd be interested to know more about that. It seems like it just limits our ability to gather public opinion, but that's a side comment. It seems to me like the way that the state presented this to us, and perhaps your personal feelings are different here. So in the presentation, it seemed to be framed as a moving forward, we will have the shared revenue, it will be increased, here are these requirements you need to meet. If there are any changes, it will just have to do with how much sales tax is being collected. But I noticed later it seemed as though you made some comments that, like for the pay plan adjustment, we were able to make it higher than usual this year, but it'll probably have to go back down next year. Do you expect this shared revenue situation to change dramatically over the next year, or what are your personal feelings on that? If that's
Sure. So we're not going to get $865,000 every year. I mean, the amount that we have, or we're not going to get an $865,000 increase every year. Right now, they're thinking, okay, sales tax collections might go up by 2 or 3%, and for us, that might be about $100,000, which sounds like a lot of money, but for a municipality, with a $28 million budget now, it really isn't, so it helps a little bit. I'm hoping that it'll at least, stabilize sort of some of the graphs that I showed where, you see this proportion of shared revenue kind of the share of the pie decreases in your budget. I'm hoping that at least that can stabilize that and kind of help us keep up with inflation. But it certainly isn't a bonanza, and, you know, and my other hope, and this is more of a wish, is that, you know, after this innovation fund is tried, maybe at some point we can, rather than doing the innovation fund, move that money into shared revenue. That would be fantastic, and that would be another increase then. But that's a wish on my part, so.
And I think your point is well taken as well when you're saying, you know, they're kind of operating under the assumption that we haven't been as frugal as we can be. And I think that we've been excellent stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, and we've been very thoughtful in how money has been spent. We've been able to survive with zero increases in departments, and I give our directors a lot of credit for being able to be creative in ways of being able to meet needs and with zero increase in dollars. So they've done an outstanding job. Mr. Mayor, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to?
Oh, I've got lots of thoughts.
Oh,
The biggest one is this was probably the most nerve-wracking budget cycle that I've experienced, because the numbers weren't always available. When they first started talking about shared revenue, and the numbers that Corey had in his presentation, you know, $2 million. Okay, $2 million. We can finally catch up. And that's one of the things I want to point out. 4 years. 4 years our departments have had a 0% increase, which is a loss, a net loss. If you think about the rate of inflation and the cost of living, zero is a net loss of those dollars. But so we were very optimistic going into it, talking about, hey, we can restore all the things that we've cut over the years and maybe allow a nominal increase. And then as things went on, it's like, okay, well, I guess you can't get the increase. And up until just a few weeks ago, we thought, when we started putting everything together, using the council's priorities of a 0%, $0 levy increase, keeping levy flat because of the revaluation, and prioritizing our compensation, we were still about $140,000 short of a balance. That took some creative works. Corey and I met a couple of times on it. Corey did, of course, the lion's share, as he always does, and balancing this out. But I actually asked the department heads to, you know, give me an idea of what it's going to take if we have to cut 2% or 3% or 5% out of your budget to make this thing work. So it could have been a lot worse. Sure could have been a lot better. And I agree that hopefully the legislature will, in the next year or two, reconsider taking emergency services like they do from the county. We get blamed for a lot of the county stuff, you know, but the emergency services are outside the county levy limits.
right.
And we don't get a dime of the wheel tax, just for those people watching. We don't get a dime of that either. So hopefully over the next couple of years, people will understand that, you know, there are some significant needs and the formula is broken, and maybe we can work on fixing that. But again, the important thing to remember here is that it's allowing us to catch up.
Yes.
And I don't want to make excuses, you know, for the state or take on their opinion, but it seems to me like it always seems to be that a small group ruin it for everybody else. Those of us in a vast majority of Wisconsin municipalities have been budgeting appropriately, being good stewards of the taxpayers' money. Stevens Point, of course, is among those. And there's always a few that don't. And they feel the need that the law has to be changed to stop those few people from doing it rather than addressing the problem directly, punishing everybody. School districts were in the same boat. They were doing real good, and you know this better than anybody here probably. So again, I want to thank everybody for their hard work on this. We have a budget that I think is going to work, and a lot of that is, well, most of that really is because of the change in shared revenue.
Right.
We wouldn't be able to run that compensation plan and implement it if we didn't have the ability to shuffle some of that money around and make that happen.
I will say it was tempting to use some of that increase in shared revenues for other things, but I'm glad that the council chose to prioritize salaries and compensation for our employees, that they are our greatest asset. We're blessed with a wonderful group of employees. I think the services provided reflect that, and I think it's important that we're able to compensate them adequately and keep and retain them. So I'm glad that we did get that increase in shared revenues, and I'm pleased that the council made the decision to almost that, and the vast bulk of that increase in shared revenues is going to compensation as it should. So I compliment Corey as well on all of his hard work and all of this. There's a lot that goes into the creation of this budget, and so thank you for all of your outstanding work. Any comments from the public? Alder Lang.
Sam Lang, Alder for District 9. Thanks again, Corey. This is great. I had just one question on the consolation, sort of the consolidation part of Act 12. Was there anything that we're looking at consolidating? Is there something like in our history that we've consolidated in the past maybe and we've done away with or something like that? I was reading our Housing Authority and Redevelopment Authority statutes, and I noticed there's a whole like Community Development Authority thing that doesn't exist, and there's some history there. Were they consolidated at one point? Is there some money to be saved by doing that sort of thing again? Do you know?
Okay. So, one of the consolidations that we did in the past, and this was actually about 10 years ago, it was just when I started with the city, was joint dispatch with the county. And city used to have its own dispatch service, and then we consolidated that at the county level, and then transferred the levy limit capacity for that to the county. So, but one of the things that I remember from that consolidation was that, I think it was beneficial in some ways, but as far as saving 10%, I don't know that it saved 10%, just because, you have the same amount of work. You still have to answer everybody's calls, of course. You just get a little bit more in the way of economies of scale. So, but that would be one consolidation. The other would be, our contract with Park Ridge, which we recently did, where we now provide fire service to Park Ridge. However, again, nobody saved 10% out of that deal. What we did is we took that extra money that was available and we reinvested that into the fire department. So, there has been some precedent for consolidation. However, the 10% requirement, I think, is a little bit on the problematic side, just because sometimes you have better services, but you don't, necessarily save
Cost savings.
Yeah, save a specific amount of money. And then I guess the other one, since Joel just walked in the door, reminded me there was a transit consolidation as well. I don't know if, Joel, you wanted to.
No, that's enough.
Okay. But with the county, and that actually helped us leverage more federal aid, I believe, and was definitely beneficial for both parties. So, and I don't know if the mayor has anything.
Yeah, if we could just add to that, all of our staff members are currently exploring options. We don't know where this might take us. We talked about leaf collection, yard waste collection today. It could be something like weed harvesting, or because it ties into other municipalities, nonprofits, or private businesses. So currently, every single department head has been asked to look at areas where we might be able to consolidate and meet that 10% savings. But like the comptroller has said, more often than not, it's an increase in the value of the service, not a direct cost savings, because generally in central Wisconsin, we're doing things as lean as we possibly can already, but we're looking at it.
And then the other thing that I just have to point this out before it slips my mind is I know a couple of you have thanked me for my work on the budget process, and I really appreciate that. However, I also feel guilty to take all of that thanks without sharing it with my deputy, Carrie Freeberg, who really, honestly, is the workhorse behind all of this. So it's certainly it's a team effort between the two of us and the rest of the staff. So I just did want to acknowledge that as well. I don't want to, take all the credit here, because Carrie does a fantastic job in getting this budget put together, and she does all the hard stuff with personnel budgeting and a lot of the technical work there. So
Point well taken.
Very true.
Thank you, Carrie. Any other comments from the public?
I do, I just have to figure out which one. Okay.
Alder Keemer.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Comptroller and Deputy. If the shared revenue increased by $856,000, what is the total amount of shared revenue we'll receive in 2024? And I was just curious, is that how and when is that distributed? Is that just like a lump sum payment, or is it done in installments?
Sure.
That would be nice.
So the total amount is about a little bit over $4.2 million, and it is distributed in two payments. One of them we receive in July, the other payment we receive in November.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other comments? Any other questions? Okay. Oh, Mr. Mayor.
Just as some parting comments, if any alderperson or citizen has questions, contact the Comptroller Treasurer's office. And if there are suggestions from the alderpersons about shifting of funds, please don't wait till the November Finance Committee meeting to suggest it. Talk to the department head, talk to the Comptroller Treasurer, the Deputy Comptroller Treasurer, and try and give them some advance notice if you're considering any sort of change, because a little change over here has a ripple effect way down here. We want to make sure that we have enough time to make sure everybody understands what any minor changes might or might not do.
Okay, thank you, sir. That being said, anything else by anyone? I want to give everyone one last shot. All right, then we have exhausted our agenda, and we stand adjourned at 7
o'clock.
7 o'clock. Perfect. Have a good evening.
Scheduled for 6 to 7?
My target was about an hour, so I figured.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.